Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to the Buddhist Wisdom podcast. And today I have my very good friend, Lama Padma Dragpa, with us to discuss his new book, as well as to discuss just the Dharma in general. So Lama Padma Dragpa, welcome. Welcome to the Buddhist Wisdom podcast.
Good to see you, Scott. Really nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. So we always get into really rich and sometimes extensive conversations. So I'm really curious what we get into today.
Me too.
Yeah, awesome. So I just wanted to introduce Lama Padma Dragpa for a moment. So I'm going to read his bio. So some of you listening to this or watching this on YouTube can get a little familiar with him. So Lama Padma Dragpa has been a resident Dharma teacher at Padma Samye Ling since 2004, the main monastery and retreat center of the Padmasambhava Buddhist Center, founded by the Nyingma Dzogchen masters, Venerable Kenshin Palden Sherab Rinpoche and Venerable Khenpo Sewang Dongyal Rinpoche. Ordained as a Lama by the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches in 2010, Dragpa graduated with honors in philosophy and religious studies from New York University in 2002, and is a senior editor of over 25 books of Buddhist philosophy and meditation. He regularly travels to lead PBC events on traditional and contemporary Buddhist philosophy and meditation. And I would also add is the author of a really wonderful book we're going to discuss today. So, just to introduce that for the listeners, Dragpa. So you just completed and it's out now and people can get it. They can read it. Your first book, self-written book, right? It's the first one you've written, called An Integral View of Tibetan Buddhism, Preserving Lineage Wisdom in the 21st century. So, and just, getting a chance to look at this book, it's really an incredible offering. So thank you so much for just taking the time to create this thing and put it into the world. And also congratulations.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I'm glad it's out there. It really does feel like an offering. I've had tremendous fortune to receive so many teachings from just extraordinary Tibetan Buddhist masters. And of course, in the wild kind of giant information age that we're all a part of, there's so much wisdom out there. And so it's just had the very, very privileged kind of special opportunity. And then, of course, Venerable Kenshin Palden Sherab Rinpoche, Venerable Khenpo Sewang Dongyal Rinpoche, my root teachers, and we've gotten to live and serve at their center here, upstate New York, for, 20 years now. So it's like a little bit of a offering, also just a contemplation that's very active in my life, preserving this wisdom, lineage wisdom, this living thrust of bodhicitta and goodness that we all have, and the methods that help kind of like get in touch with that and activate that and shine it on for the benefit of ourselves and others. So yeah, it's a
Wonderful.
Rich exploration currently happening.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. We'll get into some ideas, some perspectives on what lineage means to you and I. Some perspectives coming from the lineage itself, lineage masters, and what they believe on that, and then also preservation, which I think that in itself is such a rich topic and sometimes a controversial one. So I think we can dig into it. Before we do that, just to introduce to the listeners out there. So what I think is really key in this book is you're kind of merging, or you're offering both your extensive study and practice in traditional Tibetan Buddhism, mostly the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, and your also extensive study and interest in integral theory and different approaches to that. And so, I'd love to hear from you, but to me, this book seems like you're trying to unify those two and or understand that integral is both a part of Dharma, and we can also use integral coming from more Western philosophy on how to approach Dharma and life. So I'd love to just hear about that, how these two meet, and kind of how those came about for you in your life, both those paths for you, and how it kind of came out in this book, I guess, how it culminated in this book.
Yeah, wonderful. So going back earlier on, I think I started really getting interested in questions like the meaning of life, like when I was in middle school. So I saw all these adults around and everyone seemed to be doing something different. And so the question kind of dawned on me in 7th, 8th grade, like, well, what am I going to do? And then that immediately kind of became like, well, how would I know what I'm going to do? And so it was kind of a rich, active, like opening of that inquiry kind of a little earlier on. And then I had the good fortune to meet a teacher in high school who passed a Ken Wilber book to me, Brief Theory of Everything. And so that kind of like sparked that connection with Ken Wilber, specifically his version of integral approach. And then that's also when kind of meditation started popping on, and then later in undergrad studies. But in general, I mean, I think I take a pretty broad view of what integral means. There's a lot of weeds and a lot of details. But in general, I think it's that an integral worldview. Like when someone's coming from an approach that could be called integral, or what I would talk about as being integral, is very similar to a middle way approach, the Nyingma in Sutra Mahayana or in Tibetan Buddhism. And this middle way approach or this integral approach is like genuinely has an active, curious, tender-hearted interest in really being with life as it's happening. And life is just messy and bursts at the seams, and it's so rich. And so it's in response to the richness of my own mind, of the relationships I'm in, of this world, which is just so amazingly complex. It's an overall approach that leans in with curiosity and doesn't automatically say, my view's the right view, I'm right, and I'm going to show you how you're wrong and you need to line up with me. So instead of like in a middle way view of holding one's own position and centering it, and then having everything else be kind of secondary or kind of adventitious or like kind of an accessory to your own thing, an integral approach and also just a bodhisattva approach is really like, what can I do in my engagement with my experience now and tomorrow and the next day to really tune into what's going on, and how can I learn from it and be with it as fully as possible in a way that's like mutually nourishing, mutually curious, and kind of activates life as like a very interesting exploration that we're a part of. And like, how can I actually serve? How can I serve beings? I think that's the key kind of insight of both the integral approach and also a bodhisattva approach in Buddhist terms. Like, what's going on in the situation? How can I be with it so that everything is mutually boosted? I would say that's a broad definition of integral. And then there's a lot of different theorists and meta-theoreticians, and of course Buddhists and Buddhist masters that have a lot of different ways of scholastically and experientially exploring that approach, exploring the world that you discover when you have an open-minded, curious approach. So I would think of it as like the integral approach is almost like the world that you're in and a part of. Mm-hmm. And the theories that you would theorize about it, whether it's Ken Wilber or a lot of other people who point to this way of being, the theory is more like the furniture or like the vehicles you move through the world in. And if the theories are helpful in science, if they're working models that are helpful to make a better working model, use it. And if that's skillful. And if it's not helpful, don't worry. Find another vehicle, find another way to color the room to make it, a more kind of overall enjoyable experience for yourself and others.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. I'm curious for you, the development too of how, because it sounded like you met kind of Ken Wilber's philosophies and your works first, and then you met the Dharma, and do you think the working with Ken Wilber's approaches and philosophies like opened you to the Dharma, and did it flavor it in some way or allow you to see it kind of more uniquely, you think, and that passion for integral and Dharma and how these connect, did that start then, or is it something that's evolved, kind of the views on that?
I think it's changed over time. I really started getting more actively into Buddhism when I was in undergrad studying philosophy. Um, and I was around so many people that were just incredibly brilliant in very analytic, logical ways. I mean, just impressively kind of magnificent logical reasoning people. But then I also at the same time would see those same people like literally almost get hit by cars when they cross the street because they were just so good and into their way of kind of genius level, kind of like parsing experience, but at the expense of what was happening around them. And that I just saw that in my experience. So the question was like, well, there has to be a way where you can integrate that a little more thoroughly, or just not in a judgmental way, but just, well, how do I want to do it? Because I like to try to be more smart. And I also want to be really kind-hearted and like actually helpful in my immediate circumstances. And I'm still working on both those. I'm a dummy and just fumbling in the dark, and obviously just so selfish. And I mean, just on the path, a student on the path. And so as like once the question was, well, how can you unify study and practice, or what does that even mean? How can you like hone intelligence and expand the definition of intelligence to include all these other ways of being in the world? Then Buddhism, like I came across in Buddhist books, and that there's so many different techniques to actually stabilize a more attentive, present, ongoing engagement with it, reality. And like, of course, there's a scholastic tradition that's very extensive. But at that point, I got into going to Vipassana.
Okay.
And started going on these 10-day going to retreats and then serving there. And that was just a brutally beautiful, honest self-assessment of like, I love the Dharma. I love engaging my mind, and it's so difficult. And so that was a challenge because there's all the tools to actually stay present moment that the Buddha provided, even in that Theravada context, which is so gorgeous and amazing and leads to liberation. I'm very confident in that from what I've kind of, from these teachings of the Buddha. And at the same time, it's my mind would just react so strongly against trying to stay in the present. I mean, try to stay present for 5 minutes uninterruptedly or 10 days straight. And it's just it's a challenge, right, Scott?
It is a challenge. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I like this, what you're bringing up already, which is this kind of sometimes what seems to be at odds, where you have this like extreme analytic approach through our thinking mind, through logical analysis. And then, you have this quote unquote meditative approach that is sort of like, some people might interpret that as like turning the thinking mind off or something like that. And, this is something in the Tibetan Buddhist lineages that both you and I have experienced as sort of like there's another way to do it, and you already mentioned it, which is like the middle way approach, where we're using reasoning, we're using logic, we're using our thinking mind in a healthy way to deconstruct the cause of suffering, or causes plural, and at the same time we're also, as you said, like growing attention, growing awareness, cultivating it, trying to understand how to bring that into experience via refining and strengthening, those meditative aspects of mind. So yeah, and anything kind of on that for you on that. So you already mentioned it, how the middle way meets integral, but I would love to go there, a little bit more. And for listeners out there, if you can define the middle way or Madhyamaka is the Sanskrit word a little bit more, just for people who might be hearing it for the first time.
Wonderful. Well, as you know, it's like such a vast, profound topic, the middle way or Madhyamaka. And so we'll just like peek into it a tiny bit, I guess. So I have an ongoing abiding sense of I'm here, and I'm basically the center of the universe. Like kind of I'm the main actor in the play, and like everything's around me. And that's kind of the default mode of me, and they would say of any sentient being. There's the felt sense that I'm here, I'm the center of it, I'm ongoing. I'm a continuous me, and I'm the most important one. I am the most special. So that's kind of what sentient mind is. And then the Buddha so kindly said, well, okay, well, how is this sense of me all the time? And he said, it's kind of hard. It's challenging being alive, right? And it is. It's really challenging, and there's fundamentally things keep moving, and so they're uncertain. And like the fact that things are uncertain causes a distress, causes a dis-ease and a dissatisfaction, and so there is this suffering. And the Buddha said, well, try to really find what is that suffering, what's the cause of that suffering, how does it work, and laid out a path to discover like the cessation or the kind of conclusion of that suffering, the ending of the suffering. And then the problem is that if, in my mind, as a selfish person, I can get a little too hung up on my path and my freedom and my lack of suffering and my torment, it all still centers around me. And so the second turning that the Buddha taught, of this, even if you try to look for the self as a fixed thing there, and he gave all these methods to help us point out and try to discover that for ourselves, we come to some kind of a resolution, or like at least glimpses into it, that, there isn't this fixed, solid, ultra important me there. And so that's a lack of fixated self or no fixed self. And then the challenge with that, and the reason the Buddha told us to look further, that even if the self is unfindable, we still locate our position in the world in so many ways. We still try to hold on. So we call it grasping on subject, grasping on object. And because of that, then the Buddha's second turning was like, if you really, for yourself, if that's of interest, look and see what is the object you're holding on to? What is the emotion you're holding on to? What is this feature of holding that we constantly sticking ourselves in place to lock things so that they can be more or less like, so we can have an ongoing sense of this is okay. Like I'm not suffering now. And that second turning was later talked about as the middle way, or the middle way of Yamaka. Yeah.
Yeah. And, just for some of the listeners out there, why would we, it's the Sanskrit word Madhyamaka, but what's middle about it? This is, I think, the interesting point that gets to, I'd like to hear from you on it, because some people might think middle like some kind of compromise, and in this case, it means something a little different. So just curious if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, a lot of ways to define it. Elizabeth Matthews Namgyal, a great Dharma teacher, she defines it as the mind poised for insight, or in an open question. That although things don't centralized in fixed, frozen, static ways, although there's nothing permanent and fixed anywhere, everything still happens. So there still is relative truth. There still is apparent relationality. There still are things engaging each other. And if we really try to zoom in and try to find the thing, or a thing, a single thing, it says it opens under inquiry. Like through our analysis, things keep getting texturized more, keep getting tenderized more, keep getting more nuanced, more complex, basically more mysterious or more relational. And so although things aren't fixed, it actually means it's because there's a plurality, or there's a constant like intermultiplicity of dynamic relationships. So to put that simply, I feel like there's an abiding sense of me. And if I look for it, I can't find a fixed abiding sense of me. So it seems like, well, there's no me. There's nothing. And if I look outside, there's no thing there that's fixed. So there's no thing there outside, no thing here inside. So the problem of that is there can be a grasping onto no thingness or nothingness. And that grasping is the second error, which the Buddha then taught the second turning for. No, it's not nothingness, because things keep moving. Relationships keep dynamically unfolding. And the energy, the creative expression of mind is even more bright and more dynamic when we grasp less. And so what would be a middle way? The middle way would be the middle way between locking things into place and then acting as if nothing's happening. The middle way between eternalism or permanence and nihilism or nothingness. The middle way is just that poise, the poise position. It's when the mind and the heart are like responsively engaged and responsively dynamic, but they're not boxing anything in a fixed final way. And that's how it's related to an integral approach.
Yeah.
It's the not boxing in a final fixed way where they line up, because things are moving. Relationships do change. I change. Everything's changing. And that can be like fundamentally frightening. But it also can be fundamentally, what would be the word?
Liberating.
It's liberating. It's a constant rug pulling.
Yeah.
You never exactly know where it's going to go. You never really know how it's going to turn out. And that's the kind of, that openness, the open dimensionality of reality is where Vajrayana comes in. And it skillfully tries to, like, with the guidance of like someone who's really accomplished, to basically an expert in being able to help us explore the richness of reality further, deeper, wider, more closely. And so there's this constant ongoing rug pulling. So based on a middle way view of like trying to always be in a poised, kind of tender, receptive state of mind and openness of heart, then we have a guide who we trust, and we say, where am I getting stuck? What am I not looking at? And we've asked them to help us find these blind spots, and they're really good at it because they've found those blind spots in themselves and they've undone them. They've not made those mistakes. And so it's a constant, okay, so the mind can be poised for a second, but then it locks up or it dulls down or it gets excited or everything comes on. And then we have someone outside, a teacher, saying, look, the nature's there and it's amazing, but you keep turning off. You keep shutting it out or turning the volume down. And I say, well, how? Why? And they keep pointing out, like a mirror, this is how. Here's the grasping Dragpa right here. And so then that is like, to see in that, look in that, explore that creatively, it reopens a poised state of creative mind. And so it re-engages a middle way. And so the whole path is just actually trying to stay in a mind that's in the middle way, that's poised for insight, that's creative and engaged. And integral would say a similar thing, except it doesn't locate itself within any specific tradition.
Yeah.
And that's how integral, especially like the Weberian version, is significantly different, because it's basically a framework of worldviews that's content free. So
what
it's
do you
not
mean
located.
By that? Like, what do you mean by content free? Because if it's a view, it has content, right?
Yeah. So, but it's almost like the frameworks that a view. It's the filter system. It's like
yeah.
It's not located in a culture or a time or a place or a language or a gender. That integral as an approach is to poise the mind. And it's not saying this is the way you need to poise it, or this is what you have to see, or here's the language we'll use to describe it. It's just open frameworks. And I think that's how it really lines up in my mind with the Buddha Dharma, Buddha's teachings as well. All of Buddha's teachings, there's different approaches, right? As you've said a lot of times before, there's many Buddhisms.
Yeah.
Because there's many approaches to explore the nature of reality. And different approaches are more or less suitable for different minds. And so in Nyingma tradition, they call those yanas, or a vehicle. Like the vehicle from going to a place of suffering to a place of freedom, where you are like basically a constant servant to beings. You're like actually genuinely care about beings, and you're actually learning more and more ways to actually help them, to actually attune with them and be with them in a full way that cares for them and loves them, but on their terms. And that's where Bodhisattva, Yana, and integral line up so seamlessly, because an integral approach has to be on the terms. It has to work according to what is already in play. Not what do I want to be in play, or how do I want it to be? What's my version? But like, what is actually happening already with another person, for example. So I have to listen. I have to become vulnerable to them and curiously learn from them, which means there's a lot of different ways of tuning into someone else. And that's where Integral provides these general kind of frames of how you can more easily tune into where someone else is coming from and their lived experience, and not filter it through any specific set of techniques, and also not require a bodhisattva bhumi realization to do it. You can have some general frameworks that anyone can learn like pretty quickly that basically will save you time on the path as like a good checks and balances system of like, is my mind poised for insight? Is my heart open and available now? Okay, checklist 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm poised, and now just see what happens.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, for me, that's a new insight around integral theory, that it has a kind of an altruism or compassion baked into it. I never thought of it like that. Obviously I haven't, mostly you're the one who's introduced me to it, through different PDFs and books and stuff. And so I know very little, but I think that's new, that it has, I guess that's a question, like, does it, or is that something you've superimposed on it based on your Buddhist background, or does it have that innate kind of compassionate approach of some kind of altruism where we're trying to benefit the world, ourselves, others, and relationships? It has that.
It does. I would say similar to Buddhism, that to speak of it as if it's compassion or like a felt experience, like a psychological state, like compassion. So that's seeing it from the inside, like a felt experience, like it is inherently compassionate. And from the outside, you can say reality does want it, just there's a tendency for it to include more relationalities, like more dynamic kind of give and take. And so here, bigger fields of cause, condition, and effect.
Yeah.
Like okay, a good example is, in my mind, it's really been helpful to think about it as like ecologies. So
yeah, I like
there's
that,
there's like ecology of a desert, and there's an ecology of a coastline, and then there's the phase shift ecology in between. So you don't want to take the coastline ecology and put it into the desert, and you don't want to take the desert ecology and put it into the ocean. They have to actually overlap somewhere. There has to be this integrative pattern. And so what it is reality itself seems to have this tendency, because it's fully relational, to include more, to become more comprehensive. But it isn't just a mess. It isn't just randomly including some desert and an ocean with a little tundra. And it actually has to line up and over time cohere. It has to actually be precise and elegant and aligned causally. So cause, condition, and effect has to keep happening. And so in an interior way, like as a person, that feels like compassion, including more comprehensive. Yeah. On the relative level, more full, not just free, right? So in Buddhism, there's a lot of talk about liberation or freedom from suffering, freedom from self-fixation. And it is, free means flowing more freely. What that means is, as a more variety of experiences happen, I can still be with them and be flowing freely. And so then as a bodhisattva, I want to try to be with more and more variety of experiences and maintain that poise, that heart mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta. Yeah. And so just as reality seems to do that, like, atoms form into groups and create molecules, and molecules form and create cells, and which create organs and tissue systems and human beings. And there's this internesting or this layering of reality, and it seems to go towards greater inclusivity. And as the Buddhism, like the 9 yana or 9 vehicle system of study and practice in Tibetan Buddhism and Nyingma, is just a perfect example of how these approaches layer themselves. Yeah, sweet. So
the listeners, just kind of a brief 9 yana.
Yeah, so I'd say just maybe make it 3 if that's easier, or like a little more elegant in this context. There's the first yana, which is foundational Buddhism. And then in addition to that yana is Sutra Mahayana, or the Bodhisattva yana, the way of the Bodhisattva. And then in addition to that is the skillful means of the Vajrayana, or the indestructible vehicle. And so in order to have the Vajrayana, it includes the Sutra Mahayana, and that has to include the Theravada foundational school. And so we have these internested ecologies of study and practice. We can unpack each of those ways of kind of becoming more free and full, both intellectually and then also experientially. So there's always a study side and a practice side, or sometimes they say a scriptural side and a realization side, actually realizing and absorbing the meaning of what the teachings are about in your lived experience. And so the core yana of like foundational Buddhism is the liberation of self, like freeing myself from all the habits that collapse the world around me and basically create a condition of suffering for self and other. And then Mahayana says, well, everyone experiences suffering. We all want to be happy every single moment. And so have a bigger view, include more, be maha, or greater, like a greater view, a greater way of caring about the world. It includes caring about yourself. And in addition to that, caring about those around you, your parents, your friends, your kids, the strangers, the enemies, the aliens, all beings. And then Vajrayana, the third yana, indestructible vehicle, or Tibetan Buddhism says, that's such a big view. It's so bold and brave and amazing, the Bodhisattva yana view. So how can I actually make myself achieve enlightenment quicker so that, and attune to beings more carefully, more full of care, more attentively, more effectively, more skillfully? How can I do that? How can I both become enlightened a little more comprehensively, more quickly, so that I can actually genuinely serve in a variety of situations? And this is all talking about for forever, for all beings, for forever. So it's a very big view, even in Sutra Mahayana. And so we have this, the self is actually not fixed and crummy at all. It's actually this amazingly powerful, dynamic, creative nexus of relationship. And we're all that way. We all have this Buddha nature, or this pure intelligence and goodness that literally has no limit. It's boundless. But to really actualize that and to explore that in relation to self and others and in between ourselves, with each other in the world, that uses these Vajrayana skillful means methods to actually unveil that, or to realize that, to have that kind of as a lived experience more quickly, so that we can actually care for others more fully, more soon. So that's a three yana approach. And then just like the experience of compassion opening to become more inclusive, that's expanding. So is the detail and the precision with which we're kind of investigating our experience of self and other and world. Yeah. It's a lot, right, Scott?
Yeah, I was just thinking, oh man, I hope you all out there on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you're listening, we're not, it's a lot, these are complex systems of, structures of structuring the Buddhist teaching. And then of course, there's even more systems for how to practice these and actually develop and realize them.
And that's where integral comes in.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
And that's also where pith instructions come in.
Yeah.
So one of my teachers, Venerable Khenpo Saung Don Rinpoche, said, if you really understand the Buddha's teachings well, you'll see that every single thing he taught was a pith instruction.
Yeah.
So it perfectly
What do you mean by
matched.
pith instruction? Just to clarify that for people.
Yeah, good. So we're given the situation of who was around the Buddha, what was happening, what was the context. A pith instruction it tunes exactly to the living dynamics of what's happening, the person, their mind, their trauma, their language, what they've been through, their past lives, all these nuanced details. And a pith instruction is the exact instruction that, given that context, will be the next way for that mind and that heart to open more fully, to turn on more brightly. So whatever's available in a context to become more nutritious, more nourished, more inclusive of its nature and of its relationships, that's a pith instruction. And so the Four Noble Truths is a set of pith instructions. And so are, the teaching on bodhicitta, like the nature of heart mind when it's open. And so every single thing the Buddha taught was a pith instruction. And the challenge is I can't see my mind and my heart that clearly to know what is the perfect poised thing for me right now.
Yeah, what's your pith instruction in this moment? Yeah, that's
in this moment.
Yeah.
And so enter mindfulness. So
yeah.
The first thing we have to do is actually show up and be like, well, what is going on with me now? And as we do that, we see there's a lot more than meets the eye within me, without me, and there's a lot more there. So the first step of any of these practices is having the mind be attentive to what is happening right now.
Yeah.
So that's mindfulness. And then there's a lot of techniques that go beyond that. Okay, what is going on with my body? What is going on with my mind? And that's where these skillful means come in, to pull out the rug of ego clinging and self-centeredness a little more thoroughly, so that I'm just not being attentive to the negative habit I'm doing. I'm actually releasing it. I'm actually not giving it energy and power, and fundamentally actually looking so closely at the way my mind is holding. There's a lot of power in that holding. There's a lot of creative energy in that holding. And if instead of clutching around me so tightly, I can use that same power and open towards sharing, towards caring and love and creative dynamic kind of expression, all of a sudden reality, the richness of it, of relationships of my mind and heart, they become ways to artistically engage with the world and each other, in my own kind of experience too. So that's easier said than done, because the ego will not, it doesn't want to get evicted.
Yeah. And I think, for me, pith instruction, even though I agree, I see all the Buddhist teachings as a pith instruction, when you really kind of, because the circumstance of a sutra is setting up the premise that it's a pith instruction. When we actually pay attention to the Heart Sutra, the Vajrakuta Sutra, Vimalakirti Sutra, whatever it is, you start to see, they're setting, I used to think it was throwaway. Why do they talk so much about the Buddha's here and then Shariputra's here and then, this is happening and these people are talking to why so much environmental information? And it's because it's setting up the circumstance of, what it is, so we have a deeper relationship to it through the sutra or whatever of the Buddhist teachings we're engaging with. But
and as sensitive postmodernists, as people who care about context, we're context sensitive. We don't want to just force feed our answer or our system or our monological colonizing thing in every circumstance. We want to be attentive and caring and responsive to what's happening in life. That's a really healthy aspect of being a 21st century person. And the Buddha did this 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, it's really, and you bring up a really good point, which is that this next wave of human kindness and development, integral, and of course, Buddha Dharma, you and I, would argue Buddha Dharma, but of course, integral or other paths are wonderful too, because people then don't have to feel, if their allergy around religion or, becoming something triggers, they can use some other techniques or ways. But the whole point is, how do we really enact kindness? And,
exactly.
Right. And so, and how do we really enact human relation and the remedying or the reduction of pain and suffering for all? And, Buddhism would say also the elimination, but let's just start with the reduction of pain, uncomfort, struggle for all. There's almost this next wave where it's there needs to be this recognition. You're advocating for it in a really clear way. This recognition that we, if we're stuck in any kind of rigidity around how we're viewing ourselves or someone else, and we're not open to there being another truth, we're not going to be able to enact kindness, love, and compassion. And then Buddhism would say we're actually going to produce more suffering for ourselves and others. And so I think you're bringing it out a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about that, because it's sort of I think it's almost there's some of us who have recognized this already, you and I through the fortune of the Buddha Dharma. And of course, that doesn't mean we're complete. We're working on our rigidity.
In process.
I think there's a lot of people who are just like, they're at a dead end and they don't know what to do. They've like hit a dead end where all their judgment, all the negativity bias, all the sort of cynicism, they're just seeing how much suffering that's producing for them. And they want something else. They just don't know where to turn, So would love your more thoughts on that. You started to introduce it.
Yeah. And here's where, in so many ways, Buddha Dharma really shines.
Yeah.
So as we come to see that things are more complex than we thought initially, there's a lot more meta crises happening now. There's a lot more challenges and wicked problems. There's situations ongoing in the world now, and also in countries and also local areas that in order to actually engage them, we need cooperation. We need different experts and different interested people to actually collaborate, to say, to integrate this valuable aspect of your insight and your skill set and this history you bring to bear, and to actually weave them into larger, more complete, more comprehensive responses to these challenges. So that's the situation we're in now, whether we like it or not, or whether we admit it or not. Like, it's all this interdependence has gotten lined up so tightly, and things are moving between the systems so quickly that the only way to engage this is to have a more comprehensive response. And where Buddha Dharma then takes that and does an additional kind of nutritious kind of opening is, it says, if you look closely at relationality, at your own mind, you'll see there's actually an abiding thread of awareness, a continuity of awareness that does not change. And as we come to see change so rapid and so dynamic and so energetic now, everything is changing and morphing so quickly, in some combinations that are healthy and a lot of combinations that we just don't know what's going to happen, and others that are really unhealthy. What Buddha said is, if you actually look close enough, there is this unchanging nature of mind. And so in middle way terms, there is an absolute truth.
Yeah.
There is this abiding, open awareness that regardless of whatever else happens, it's always open and aware and clear. It's always kind and loving and engaged. And so part of the response to the 21st century life in a very dynamic time is the importance of trying to recognize this unchanging aspect of mind and heart, this absolute truth. And there's different wisdom traditions that have different sets of techniques and lineages to do this. But Buddha Dharma has many different techniques to reveal this. And then the awesome thing about it is, the more we would get in touch with what is actually spacious and open and accommodating with our experience, the more relationship we can include, the more dynamic cause, condition, and effect we actually care about.
Yeah. So it's not another gateway to more cynicism and individualism. It's the opposite. Yeah.
It's the opposite. So it gives us a really giant sweeping relief of, like, regardless of how this plays out, there is this open dimensionality, or this openness that is unaffected. It's like the sky is not affected by the weather. That openness is there. But the more open we can get, it's like here. A good example that I found is, it's like if you have a cup of water and you put in like a tablespoon of salt in the cup, it ruins the water. But if you make your mind like an ocean, if you make your heart like a lake, then you put a little bit of salt in it, it's no big deal. And so having some technique that actually helps us explore and taste for ourselves, what is it like to have an openness of heart and an openness of mind that's so big that it can hold the challenge and the tension and the dynamic energy of friction, of uncertainty, of deep trauma. What's that openness bring? And it actually brings more love. It brings more sympathetic joy, more rejoicing, more compassion. So we want to show up more carefully in our relationships and our lives. And that then becomes a question of, maybe I have to learn some physics. Maybe I need to learn some math. Maybe I need to learn another language. So maybe I need to actually train or study in the multiplicity of ways that actually enables me to use this kind of like more settled awareness that's more tuned in to the living dynamics of what's going on with someone else, or what's this particular problem I have to deal with right now.
Yeah.
And so Integral does that very lovingly and elegantly. And of course, the Way to the Bodhisattva is all about that. All these great masters, His Holiness Karmapa, His Holiness Dalai Lama is a perfect example. He's been doing these mind and life conferences with scientists and cosmologists and psychiatrists and psychologists and neuroscientists for almost like 35 years now.
Yeah.
And how do all these specialists who've trained and researched so extensively, how can we kind of integrate or pool our knowledge, our different skills, our research to see more comprehensive patterns, more elegant ways that life actually is mutually enriching? And so that I can show up in this specific context with a tool that's needed in an effective way that brings the relief, the reduced suffering for self and others.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, it's almost like, for me, more and more, and I don't want to be oversimplistic, but when we let go of trying to find the answer, capital A answer, we actually focus more on and pay more attention to the relationality or the relationships surrounding an event or a situation or an emotion, a thought, whatever it is, external, internal. So to me, there's like that. That's what you're pointing out is sort of, that's part of it. And then, of course, within that relationality, we can then develop more complexity if it's needed. But we're not putting complexity first. We're putting nowness and openness to ourselves in the moment first. Is that what I'm hearing you advocate for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Buddhism advocates for it in general. Like, a phrase that's been helpful for me is simplicity within complexity.
Yeah.
So it's not running away from the complexity of life, of experience, the richness. It actually is in the middle of the storm, or it's in the middle of the dynamic impulse of like emergent living. But it's like, how do we do that elegantly? How do we actually do that in a graceful way? And that's where the simplicity is. So we're not trying to erase or kind of like normalized out of really rich, juicy diversity. We're not trying to flatten things. We're trying to let the things be richly as they are and see the elegant through line, see the different interweaving patterns between and within. So this is a liminal thing. This is a Bardo exploration.
We can use the word middle now. It's a middle thing because the middle is neither side. So it's also a middle thing. Yeah. So
it's the integration point. It's the weaving, the larger story that we're all a part of. And and that's where the middle way teachings are also super relevant. There's no final story. There's no final answer, like you said. There's no final fixed me. There's no final fixed end. It's always ongoingly changing. There's no final frame. And that's where ideas of achieving some universal final end of anything, middle way view of Buddhist teachings, they say that's a fundamental mistake.
Yeah, that's where Nirvana even gets refuted somewhat,
Yeah, Heart Sutra, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. It basically, any position we try to hold as a final answer, the rug gets pulled and says, look closer, it's unfindable too. And instead of freaking out and saying nothing, there's nothing, we say there's openness and it includes everything. And so then you get Nagarjuna says the view beyond all views is to actually see the utter infinite relationality of every single position.
Yeah.
And so call that openness or call that interdependence. I mean, interdependence, but to really explore that in a textured way where the complexity is honored, but it actually still lands in a lived experience that actually gets traction. And so Integral is really good at saying, okay, what are the basic dynamics of a situation so you're not leaving out like a gaping hole in your theory or your engagement? Because so what are the big boxes? And the 9 jhana system of the Buddha does that too. Like there's a quick checklist, as you know, like the 3 points that are really helpful that are repeated every time I've ever received a teaching. Activate joy and appreciation. That's called renunciation mind.
Yeah.
Generate bodhicitta, the heart mind of enlightenment. Help everyone be happy and free, enlightened. 3, pure perception. See that when we're actually not in a fixated state of mind and we're in an open-hearted engagement, actually things are just aligned and attuning like naturally. It's autopoetic, sympoetic systems of interrelationality or interdependence. And so these 3 points, they're pith instructions. That's how like Tibetan Buddhism elegantly brings these 3 yanas together. Like the so-called Hinayana or foundational Buddhism, Mahayana, Vajrayana, it's renunciation, bodhicitta, pure perception. And that's one of the ways that as a lineage teaching, in terms of Vajrayana Buddha Dharma, it has these very pithy ways that bring entire systems or ecologies together in these really succinct, elegant, simple within complexity. They like really hit all the main nodes and activate the whole system. And that's why Vajrayana is a more swift path. You take an entire system, you align all the different parts of the system, and then you let it sync up with itself more fully. And it's just more comprehensive. And that way, it's just more integral. It's trying to see what are all the like essential parts or fundamentals, the first principles that have to be cared for. You pay attention to all of them, and then you let the system, its own natural intelligence, self-correct.
Yeah, really interesting way to look at it. Yeah. You know, I love to segue into talking a little bit about kind of the subtitle of the book, Preserving Lineage in the 21st Century. You know, as a segue to that, I if it's okay, I'd love to share this kind of Sonny Rinpoche is one of his approaches to simplicity and complexity, and I find it really pithy and helpful. And then I think from this, I'd love for us to segue into like, okay, well, I'll start with that, and then I'll request you. So yeah, he just basically has this teaching on the development of simplicity on the inside and complexity on the outside. And it's very much saying the same thing you're saying.
Yeah.
And he gives this example that, you know, when there's complexity on the inside, he's referring to a kind of neurosis, a kind of anxious resistance of impermanence. You know, you're bringing up impermanence. You know, another way to talk about this rug pull, right? That you're describing is just impermanence, that things are changing. And the moment we land on the rug's going to naturally change. And if we resist that, we're going to struggle. We're going to suffer. And that would be a part of the complexity where we don't, you know, we might not have an awareness of that, or we just might not be able to accept that. And instead, we're holding a type of neurotic complexity on the inside that's trying to organize and box everything in, you know, to its own place. And so it's like juggling with, you know, like 500, you know, balls or something like that. That's what
it's like. It's like making a big fat complex book.
Oh, show us your book. Show us your book. I meant to ask you at the beginning. Wonderful, beautiful. We got the no, show it. You know, hold it up if you don't mind. I'll you know, for those of you listening via audio on a podcast platform, it's got a beautiful image of Guru Rinpoche or Padma Samye Ling on the front, and it is a big, thick book. That's why I was like, Dragpa, you know, just the thought of doing something like that, you know, will keep me up at night. So congrats on just getting something like that finished. But I'm not surprised. You're as we can all see, you're incredibly developed and intelligent person. So yeah, going back to this complexity, simplicity. So it's sort of like we can see where complexity actually causes suffering. And then complexity on the outside, you know, you're pointing that out, you know, in the last 20 minutes or so. That's just a natural feature of the world because interdependence is so complex and cause and effect is so complex, right? And again, I'm just saying what you're saying. I'm just recapitulating in a different way. And I think, you know, through Sonny Rinpoche's kind of beautiful pith instruction, so we can see it's already complex on the outside. We can't change that, right? And so
we don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need to. And so I think there's this question of what simplicity looks like. And of course, you and I adhere that we develop inner simplicity via engaging with the lineage and the lineage teachings and practices. And so I'd like to segue into that, as well as preserving that and what that means to you. But I also want to describe something that's quite funny, because when I first heard this instruction or this teaching from Sonam Shape, he also described what not to do. He said, I mean, most of us struggle more with being complex on the inside and complex on the outside, right? Meaning, like, the world is complex and we're also complex, and we're anxious, we're stressed, we're not able to, you put it beautifully a few minutes ago, like, we're not able to find that, I'm paraphrasing, but like that ground of changelessness, right? I think could be a wonderful definition for simplicity, which is not a state of mind, it's a way of being, but it happens through mind, happens through awareness and meditation. But yeah, when he was pointing out this teaching, Son Rinpoche would say, but really, it's a lot of suffering when you're actually complex on the inside, and you're trying to force the world or your experience into being simple on the outside. He said that's the most suffering. And I was a monk at the time, and I was like, oh shit, like, that's pretty much what I'm doing, because I was very complex and neurotic. I still am, but also I was trying to have this artifice of simplicity of being a monk, and it was a real struggle for that reason. So it was a funny kind of aha moment of like, oh, I need to work on the simplicity on the inside and use the external simplicity of being a monk to develop the inner simplicity. And then, of course, once we develop inner simplicity, we could also hold complexity. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that, but also segueing into like preserving, what lineage is, preserving it, all of that for the benefit of what we're describing here.
Again, His Holiness Dalai Lama is such a good example. He meets with diplomats and world leaders, presidents, prime ministers. He's been doing that for decades. And internally, you can tell by how he acts. He's always playful. There's always a light touch, a lightness, like he's so jovial and delighted, and also very serious and very intense when that's appropriate. Like, he's a masterful authority of Buddha Dharma by all accounts, and he can lead really complex empowerments, and he can also just play with when a situation's too tight, too tense, too serious, too dramatic. He's really good at popping the bubble, and everyone just remembering, we're just humans here, we're trying to do our best, and like, how can we reset it to like activate this common ground we have, this goodness that we have inside, this amazing opportunity we have to collaborate together. And so, I don't know, and you can frame that situation in a lot of different ways. I mean, to have simplicity inside in a complex world, right? Fearless simplicity, how to live in a complex world. Or carefree dignity, like, or Patrok Rinpoche, like how to have the gut that's like in deep integrity, and the compassion, the bodhicitta that's so blazingly bright inside, and the clarity of mind, the boldness, the openness of vision, to like have wisdom, compassion, and skillful means, power, compassion, and insight all together as a seamless individual, as a person in the world who has to deal with these things that are out of my control. So how to do that? That's the question, and that's like where it's really relevant, because each of us needs to find the way that it works for me right now. And that's why you don't need to do like a giant this. You don't need to do all 9 yanas at once. You don't need to master the 84,000 teachings. But we do, in order to maintain the integrity of a living system, we do need to like study enough to know what are the essential first principles, are the main points that like have to be in place in order to maintain the integrity of a system. Like skillful means, compassion, wisdom, or like the 4 noble truths, or the 4 boundless qualities. The Buddha gave so many different ways. It shows how just amazingly, he's just an enlightened being. I mean, it's like so impressive the way he can take an inexhaustible, infinite reality and then slice it up slice that pie in any variety of way that's actually going to help the being that he's with right then.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
in that slicing, or in that like simplifying of reality, he's not distorting reality. He's not adding anything or deleting anything. He's actually just making it digestible for the person he's with. So if you want to hear about one yana, talk about Dzogchen. If you want to hear about two yanas, talk about Sutra and Tantra. If you want three yanas, foundational Buddhism, Sutra Mahayana, Tantra Mahayana. If you want four yanas, right? I mean, he kept doing this: foundational Buddhism, Sutra Mahayana, outer Tantras, inner Tantras, or 9, or 84,000. And what each of us needs to do is like keep checking in with, what is helping my mind now? Like, what is helping my heart now to open a little more, to have a little more inner confidence, to have a little more clarity of vision? Like, those are real lived practitioner questions. And so it's, what's the simplicity, the elegance, the grace that actually makes my mind poised right now? Not so I dumb down the complexity, but so I can include more of it. And I can include it in a way that actually brings these kind of dynamic relationships together into larger, more cohesive wholes, into a larger system. Some people like talking about it as a game. And this is really related in Buddhism. They talk about relative truth or relational truth, cause, condition, and effect. And Buddhist definition of relational or relative truth is always artificial.
Yeah.
Fabricated. Not true. It's like a husk. It's always, in integral terms, it's always partial, which means it's limited. It includes part of the story, but not all of it. So in science, a model. Every model is an approximation of what reality is. It's not actually reality. It's representing it. And so the thing is we need to use what works for my mind and heart now as a game, or as a language, or as a elegant set of simple ways that I can include more. I can be with more dynamic energy. I can honor the more of the fullness of myself, the parts of myself that I'm scared to look at, that take a lot of courage and energy and like support to look at. And that's why always Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the three jewels. Like, the Buddha is going to tell us, oh, there is such a being who became fully awake. And the Dharma, how did that happen? How can we do that? And the Sangha, what are the supportive conditions, including people on the path, that can actually boost us up? And we can boost too. We can mutually inspire each other and like help each other, like keep things on track, keep the elegance and the dignity of the system cohesive, together, integrated. And that's all about preservation. And so it's not innovation versus preservation, or it's not some like very fundamentalist version of conserving. What we're doing is conserving the really critically important aspects of reality that are so valuable. And the question is, what are those points? What are those elegant, simple essentials? But those essentials are naturally dynamic. They're naturally adaptive. They don't shut out life. They include life. So they're naturally responsive. So they're not fundamentalist essential things we need to conserve. They're like the key pithy points that if we turn those on in our experience right now, we'll become more open-hearted and more clear-headed. And so, but it's a lived question for each person. What is it for my mind right now? And then so we can have a teacher, or we can have a Sangha, a community, that helps us see, well, what helps me now? What is supportive for my flourishing now? And that could be a partnership, that could be a kid, or with a wisdom elder, or with an accomplished master. It depends on the mind. And that's why Buddha was fundamentally, like, he was not dogmatic. He said, here's a method, use it when it's helpful. And once you achieve the benefit of the method, don't keep applying it, because you can over apply it. You're already on cruise level. You don't have to turn the engines on then. But if you lose cruise level and the mind locks up again, you have that tool available. And then also, in a Bodhisattva view, if you never need that tool again, you still have it to be able to carefully relate with others. This is not all about my path. This is about like actually learning how to like cue into what's helpful for others. And that's where the elegance is. Like, we need to like see clearly, what's actually helps the alignment in this situation? How can I attune to it? How can I care and uplift it more? And so integral has its own sets of ways of framing that. They talk about stages, states, types, lines, shadow. And so there are these different big boxes. Like, and Nyingma Buddhism has all of these. It's fundamentally has all this. So that's kind of part of when I was coming to practice, when I was practicing Buddha Dharma for a bit, and I still am, and I was studying integral a bit, I could see the more I practiced and studied Buddhism, the more I could see how it's an inherently integral system.
Yeah.
So, which means it was produced by a mind. The Buddha Dharma was a set of techniques and insights that were revealed by a mind that was at the very least an integral level, an integral worldview, because it was curiously including more and more cause, condition, and effect. So the Buddha, I think, is way beyond integral.
Yeah.
Post integral. It just happens to be the next step that most human beings, if we're going to live together on a planet for hopefully longer, we need to have more of our systems be more integral or integrated, more of a collaboration and less of a black and white binary war. Because there's a lot of ways to go to war. And there's a pre-modern way and a modern way and a postmodern way. And integral fundamentally doesn't want to go to war. It says, what do you bring that's good? What do I bring that's good? How can we integrate these to a more comprehensive, full system or responsiveness that honors as much of the beauty, the goodness, and the truth of reality as we possibly can? Always knowing that things are going to keep changing and we're going to need to include more. So it never becomes a final answer or like some fixed dogma. So the system itself is only so good as the tool or the technique maintains the poise of mind and heart. And once it doesn't maintain it, find a better working model. That's why Buddhism can look one way in Japan and one way in Sri Lanka, and it can look a whole nother way in the wild west of contemporary culture with smartphones and AI, disembodied, imaginal, yellow elephants speaking, languages we have no clue. Like, get ready for the explosion. So, so complexity, I think 10 years from now, we'll look back on these times as the good old days.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Because it'll look so much simpler. 2023 will look a lot more simple than 2033.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes down to power. This is really relevant to Vajrayana in particular.
Yeah.
Because in Vajrayana, basically it's saying, if you don't have the heart of bodhicitta, of heart, mind of enlightenment, this deep compassion for all beings, I'm here to serve beings. What actually helps them? Not what I want for them, but what actually helps them, and they would agree, So Vajrayana introduces these skillful means to sync up and connect with more of the relationality of experience, more quickly, more thoroughly. But if you don't do this with bodhicitta, and all you do is have a set of ways of seeing more clearly where someone else is at and what their condition is, then you can take advantage of that. That's why bodhicitta, compassion, is always at the heart of authentic lineage in Buddhism, and in Tibetan Buddhism, very much so. If you just take the methods and you don't do it with compassion, that's called Rudra.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you're taking a system that could help the enlightenment of all beings, and instead you're using it for your own personal power, the one ring to rule them all. And that is like the fundamental mistake that Buddhism points to. And what we're kind of entering into is we're starting to play with technology and insights, artificial intelligence, ways of having large language model systems have a lot more expansive kind of like engagement with cause, condition, and effect. Yeah. But it doesn't yet require bodhicitta, which means we can do more damage on a bigger scale more quickly and more accidentally too.
Yeah.
But Vajrayana says you can't, if you don't have the ability to work with that much cause, condition, and effect skillfully, or that much power, then don't do it. Like, you have to have bodhicitta, and that's what's lacking. And so, in how we talked about it earlier was the middle way view. You have to have the middle way view, that elegance of simplicity within complexity, in order to not cause a chain reaction of a lot of distress.
Yeah, because it's not just you're bringing in a lot of things, including ethics, but the Mahayana perspective is it's not just about ethics. There also needs to be this openness and view that's moving beyond the two sides of existence and non-existence. Otherwise, the ethics are going to become rigid and ineffective and fuller benefit. So I love how you're bringing that in different ways. Where, for those of you where bodhicitta is a new term, bodhicitta doesn't just mean being a nice person. It means actually living a life from the middle in the way we've been describing it. And then from that middle, you also don't see a difference between yourself and another, or the happiness of yourself versus another. And so then through the skillful means of Vajrayana or just Mahayana, general Mahayana, we can benefit people a lot from that place.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
So Buddhism, Bodhisattva, there's no such thing as an externality. There's no place where we get to ship all of our waste product to some other place and have someone else deal with it. That doesn't exist in Buddhism. And yet we're in samsara. Everything has unintended consequences. We always take energy from somewhere else to sustain ourselves. Like, it's fundamentally internested system of cause, condition, and effect. So there is suffering because there is a push and a pull. There is a this and a not that, but we're trying to grow to be more inclusive, like more interrelational or interdependent, more attentive to how that is actually what's already happening. And we're just seeing more of what we didn't see before. But little by little, it's drop by drop. This is I think one of the inspiring things for me is, in terms of the view, like having a worldview or having a way of being with experience, a mode of it being that actually is inclusive and loving, and like actually it shows up with a lot of care and attention.
Or at least a practice of that. I consider it just like I'm practicing, I have a practice of that.
We're turning it on.
Yeah.
So the practice turns it on, and we're trying to turn it on and trying to keep it on in a way that's actually responsive with what's happening around. Yeah. It's tricky, Scott.
It's complex and yet so simple at the same time.
So simple,
as you were pointing out. We may have to do a part 2. This is really wonderful, and I feel like we're actually getting to some really interesting kind of like inner content too on AI and sort of all these things. So I would love to invite you back to do a part 2 at some point if you're open to that.
Yeah. Of course, I'm happy to have more time. I mean, it's so rich. All this exploration is so rich. And I think the point I was wanting to get to was every little bit counts. If we slightly change our view to be more loving, to be more calm, more settled, more confident, that affects everything else we're going to do. And so like a tiny little tweak in the view, like one little drop of doing a good thing, has the power to actually have a tremendously significant impact on the future of ourselves and on others. So we shouldn't hold out enlightenment or these big view projects like saving the world or like finally ending the suffering of everything. Like, we have to hold that lightly, both recognize what's absolute and what's relative. Like that in Buddhist framing, that's really key. But just to not forget that, like, that a moment of mind that's actually loving, that actually cares about all beings, The Buddha said that the merit, the virtue, the positive power or impact of that moment, if it were to be materialized as a thing, the entire universe is not big enough to fill how much goodness is generated from a single moment of the mind poised for insight, of it genuinely caring about other beings. Like, it's so tremendously positive and impactful to have even a second of a mind like that. And so the practice, like trying to tune in again and again and relax and kind of connect and have dignity turn on and have creative intelligence shine on, the prajna, the wisdom, whatever helps you do that is like to be celebrated. And each person should find the things that, what does help me do that? And that changes over time. So like to keep checking in with ourselves and a community we're in, if we're fortunate, or a guide, a wisdom elder, a teacher to help us keep doing that, keep being poised, keep being responsive, keep being further kind of integrated. And bit by bit, we basically allow ourselves to become more natural. We're basically more comfortable with like kind of going with the flow and doing that in a way that actually lines up with precision and isn't careless. It's actually attuned or aligned. It's not wishful thinking. It's not magical thinking. It's actually amazingly attentive and intimately like paying attention to both self and other. But yeah, just as like really genuinely, if people have the opportunity and they have the belief, because belief is a powerful thing. If there are such beings in the world that have achieved this poise as a steady way, you mentioned Soknir Rinpoche, of course, His Holiness Dalai Lama, the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche, His Holiness Karmapa, His Holiness Sakya Trizin, all these masters, and this is just within the Buddhist context. I'm sure there's wisdom elders in other contexts, but they're around. And actually being around someone who's like that, being in their presence, like actually learning from them, or like seeing their videos, listening to their podcasts, like receiving instruction and really contemplating it, like letting it touch your heart, like that possibility is an open opportunity right now for us. Like in this world, it's like one of the very beautiful things about the information age. If we're discerning with what we take in, what is signal, and we discern what's signal and what's noise, what's healthy for me and what's not so good now. Like syncing up with beings that have the stability of poise of mind, like that level of openness of heart is amazingly beneficial. And it doesn't mean it's going to let us have all our wishes be granted. Because a lot of our wishes, it's better if we don't get them. The genie in the bottle, there's always unintended consequences when we make the wish, you know?
Yeah, so, that's a good point.
But yeah, a little bit of bodhicitta, like they'll help bodhicitta shine more brightly, those great wisdom beings. And I'm happy to, anytime to talk about bodhicitta, that's the one simplicity within complexity element. If you have to boil down all of the maze of complexity of Buddha Dharma, of the whole Vajrayana view into a single word, it's bodhicitta, heart, mind of enlightenment. And that's the one word that you can use to unpack every single other thing in the Buddha's teachings. It's not reductionist. It's not an oversimplification. It's actually an elegant through line that weaves together all of the teachings. So if in our world of like takeaways and PowerPoints and 5, life hacks, the one life hack, bodhicitta, that is actually tried and true according to the lineage teachings of the Buddha. And all the great masters say that in one voice. The bodhicitta is the way that no matter what the situation, that will benefit self and others.
Beautiful. Yeah. 100% agree. And Lama Padma Dragpa, thank you so much for sharing just your wisdom about your book, about kind of the intersection of integral theory and Tibetan Buddhism. And yeah, I think we definitely need a part 2 to continue our conversation. Just real quick, where can people get the book? I'll put it in the notes on YouTube, but for the people listening on Spotify or somewhere else, where can they connect with you? Where can they get your book?
Yeah, so I live at Padma Samye Ling. It's a retreat center of the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, and their website is padmasambhava.org.
Mhm.
That's Padma Sambhava, the person who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet. Padmasambhava.org. And on there, there's like a little Dharma store. It has the book. And of course, on Amazon, like if you look up Integral View of Tibetan Buddhism, that's there now. Yeah. And then, I don't know, I'd say use the book if you engage it at all. Like, use it to actually develop confidence that you have this goodness in you, and there are beings in the world that have this goodness and they've stabilized it. And then find a master or find a teacher, find a community that helps that turn on for you. But as a book, whatever, it's a choose your own adventure. So it's written for integralists and Buddhists, and both people entering it newly and also people who are seasoned and been around in the thick of it for a long time. Choose your own adventure. Find a piece of it that might help you if it's interesting, and have fun exploring.
Cool. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put that link in the notes. But yeah, Lama Padma Dragpa, thanks so much for your friendship, your wisdom, your beauty. Just really appreciate it. And I hope we can talk again soon.
Yay, awesome. Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate you. Thank you.